Hello everyone, my name is Barbara and I would like to welcome you all to our latest Knowledge webinar episode. This week, introducing V-Ray for Revit Beta. Join Brian Russell, Business Line Manager of V-Ray for Revit, as he talks through the highlights of Chaos Group's powerful new foray into the AEC industry, V-Ray for Revit. Brian will go through the concept behind the product and demonstrate the features that contribute to the remarkable power of this design-focused platform. Attendees will gain a greater sense of the simplicity and ease of use of the product and learn new workflows that will save time and effort. Brian will be happy to follow his presentation with answers and examples based on extensive experience in creating and implementing BIM workflows. Brian has over 17 years experience in architecture visualization and building information modeling for architecture, engineering, and construction industry. He has served on the National BIM Standards Committee, aided in the development of the BIM Institute at Towson University, and regularly teaches a BIM theory and practice course at the Community College of Baltimore County. Brian has spoken at numerous events all over the US and consults regularly on BIM projects and standards. So Brian is totally legit, not that we had any doubt. And now, before we get going, here's an overview of what we do at Knowledge. Knowledge is one of the largest online stores for design software, and we offer a huge assortment of software solutions that cater to virtually every designer's need. Put us to the test and come visit our webpage at knowledge.com. As you know, V-Ray for Revit is not available yet, so stay tuned and follow us on our blog, on Facebook or Twitter for further announcements. Coming up next week, Modo for Design Ideation. Also, this webinar is known as the Dog Ate My Webinar. Lots of surprises. And last but not least, today's webinar is free and is being recorded live. If you want to watch this or any webinar episode on our collection, just head on over to Knowledge's YouTube and Vimeo channel. And now, let's not waste more time and pass the word and the screen to Brian. So Brian, I'm going to make you the presenter and I'm going to let you just take a center stage.
Perfect. So thank you everybody for having me today. It's really exciting for me to announce, kind of bring to the public the V-Ray for Revit product. And this has been a long time in the making. I'll talk a bit about that here in just a moment. But for those that aren't familiar with Chaos Group, we're over 150 people now, headquartered in Sofia, Bulgaria. We also have U.S. headquarters in Baltimore, Maryland. We have an LA office, Korea office, Japan, and Spain as well represented. So we truly are a global company today. Spoke a bit about my qualifications earlier, talked a bit about the BIM side of things, but what we didn't get into is some of the history behind the V-Ray for Revit product. And I'd like to, if you'll indulge me for a moment, just get into some of the history behind this product. It's been really 10 years in the making. Which sounds almost ridiculous on the face of it, but it's absolutely true. So back in 2004, I worked for a guy by the name of Corey Rubidou, who runs our U.S. operations for Chaos Group, at a company called A.R. St. Gross. It's an architecture and planning firm in Baltimore. And Corey and I were really looking for ways that we could streamline the visualization process. And in fact, when I went to work for ASG originally, I did so as part of the visualization group. And we were just starting to implement Revit in 2004. Prior to that, we were getting 2D. I know this is still kind of a common workflow. And we were building 3D models in 3D Studio Max. And in some cases, we were using Rhino to build some models, and then we're taking them into Max to do visualization. And we decided, there's got to be a better way to get this into the hands of designers and actually get them to transition first into, modeling in 3D, and second, to get them, rendering on their own so it can inform their design process. And so that's really what's brought us to V-Ray for Revit. And in fact, Somewhere in my files, I've got from 2004 an old build of what originally allowed us to export Revit geometry. We didn't get materials or anything like that, but it allowed me to export Revit geometry and pull it directly over V-Ray geometry, directly over into 3D Studio Max and into V-Ray, and then render it at render time there. It was far from perfect. It needed a lot of work, but it worked internally for us. And so, you know, we spent a lot of time talking with Autodesk, working behind the scenes, getting, you know, V-Ray aligned, perfecting it in Rhino. In fact, the same core development group that was at Ayer St. Gross became ASG Viz, which then was bought out a few years ago by Chaos Group proper. And so that's what brings me here today. So the idea behind the project is really we wanted to reach out to architecture, engineering, and construction and ask them, what is it that you want out of V-Ray in a Revit integration? And so we interviewed hundreds of firms and individuals, from VFX, from a visual art visualization specialists to designers to principals of firms, and ask them, you know, what do you want from V-Ray for Revit? What do you want that product to be? And the first thing that came up is it's got to be accessible by designers. They have to be able to render with it. It needs to be as closely integrated as possible to the product. The second is that we needed to simplify the interaction. In other words, you got to make it easy to use. I can't make it any more simple than that. It's just, you know, I got to be able to go in there and not have to worry about 10,000 settings, but be able to set up and very quickly render. Out of that, we need to be able to get good results, and it's got to be fast. For those of you who've been working with V-Ray for many years, you've developed settings that are that balance of speed and quality. And just to kind of illustrate this point a little further, what I'd like to show you is a spreadsheet, and this spreadsheet is hundreds and hundreds of lines, but these are V-Ray settings. And what we're able to do is take all of these V-Ray settings, as far as the render is concerned, image samplers, how many subdivisions do we want, etc., and bake that into what effectively becomes this. And if you look in the product, what you'll see is we have quality settings. We have draft, low, medium, high, and very high. And so we spoke a little bit earlier about, is this product any different from V-Ray for Rhino or V-Ray for SketchUp or any of the other products for that matter? Yes, it's dramatically different, and here's why. When we wanted to make this thing accessible to every designer, it needed to be push-button simple. And that's not to say that designers aren't capable of finding the right settings and making it move forward, but it is to say that they've got a job to do, which is design, and we want to support that in every way that we possibly can. If they're spending their design time worried about the settings inside of V-Ray, they're doing less time designing, more time worried about the settings in V-Ray. And so we've come up with this design-based approach to V-Ray here that is a bit of an oversimplification. We don't have a million settings under the hood that the end user is going to have access to. But what this allows us to do is I can go in, set my quality, set my view, hit the render button, and I'm ready to go. So what's under the hood of V-Ray for Revit? This is the first foray, if you will, into what's become the V-Ray App SDK. And without getting too technical about this, the V-Ray App SDK is essentially a wrapper to the V-Ray core technology. So the same core technology that drives V-Ray for Maya, V-Ray for Max, we have a wrapper for the App SDK. And that allows us to plug in other products, for instance, Revit, future products like V-Ray for Rhino, V-Ray for SketchUp, even other additional products out there will use this as their way of kind of accessing the core V-Ray features. That way we update in one place and it updates everywhere else somewhat autonomously. In addition to that, we're reliant on the Autodesk Revit API, which I'll show you here in just a moment. So what I'd like to do is just hop into a live demo. This is my reminder that we are, in fact, beta, and strange things happen when you're in beta. So hopefully we won't crash here, but you never know what's going to happen. I'm using, just for reference, I'm using Revit One Box, which is the suite-based solution. But we've tested this extensively with Revit One Box, Revit Architecture, Revit Structure, Revit MEP. Without any difficulties whatsoever. It works across the platform. At this point in time, and just for clarification, we don't support Revit LT simply because they don't have the Revit API or the SDK. We have no way of interfacing with that product, so there's no way for us to build a render around it yet. We'll continue to work with the Revit development team on those things. But so here we are in Revit. Hopefully everyone can see this. I believe you should be able to see this without any hesitation. We have a standard toolbar here. I'm just going to quickly walk through the interface to give you some idea of what's here. One thing that you'll notice is that I'm in my project browser. I'm in a sheet view at the moment. And that's important to note because if I go into a 3D view or camera view, my toolbar will gray out. And this is a little bit of a disappointment to us, and in fact we've spent a lot of time with the Revit development team on how we might get around this problem. And what we found is this happens to the Revit API right now, which will not allow us to render directly from this view. So we'll talk a bit about how we've gotten around that, at least for the moment. We are continuing to work with Autodesk on this, and hopefully we'll find some resolution to that in the near future. But just to prove a point, even Autodesk's own software and camera views don't work. So, you know, that's not to knock them. I know the teams are working really hard to solve this problem. Just to show you that that does in fact exist. And so once we go into any standard 2D views, or if we go into a 3D view, here that's a non-camera view, we still have access to the toolbar and we can still send renderings. So not everything is coming up roses, but we are working on this, and I think, you know, frankly, we've done a pretty good integration, all things considered, but I'll let you guys be the judge of that. So in addition to a standard interface, we've had to put in a way for us to see the active views that are inside of Revit. And so what we're doing is we're parsing the Revit database and pulling up camera views as well as additional 3D views that exist inside of the Revit database. You can actually type in, if you know exactly what you're looking for, keywords and start to get to the views that you're looking for, or you can select what view you want to render from the toolbar right here. In terms of the renders, we've got the standard production renderer that you all probably know and love from Rhino and SketchUp and V-Ray for Macs. We also support V-Ray RT, CPU, as well as CUDA-enabled GPUs. We're looking additionally for support in RT beyond CUDA-enabled, and in fact may have that solved here very soon. And then the last thing allows us to export a VR scene. This is really built for future functionality. Might be able to make use of this right now, but ultimately VR scene will allow you to bundle up your Revit model, all of the geometry that's there, all of the V-Ray materials that you've got associated with your scene, etc. It'll bundle it all up into a package that we can then send to a cloud-based rendering solution. We can also send over to 3D Studio Max, which should be able to import it in the future. Our long-term goal here is that we'd ideally like to be able to export a VR scene from any of our verticals, Rhino, SketchUp, Max, etc., open it in any of the others and be able to use geometry and scene. And when I render, I should get the same quality across the board. So It's a lofty goal. It's going to take us a little bit of time to implement, but that's kind of where our heads are these days insofar as the AEC market is concerned. We've got a show frame buffer button in here, pretty simple. The quality levels that we discussed earlier, draft low, medium, high, and very high, which in this case stands in the place of production at action render. We've got a resolution button. We have 3 ways of handling resolution currently. You can use pre-selected resolutions in here. You can set a custom resolution. You can use the crop box for your scene. And if you use the crop box, you can use screen, which has some limitations at the moment in finding center of geometry versus center of screen because of resolution differences. We're continuing to work on that in the beta process. If you choose the printer option, this is the one that's most closely related to what you would see if you printed or rendered a view out of Revit natively. And you can adjust the DPI to have that then automatically adjust your resolution accordingly. So we'll go with something like a 96 here for now. Artificial lights, just to speak a bit about artificial lights at the moment, what we're supporting are IES fixtures inside of Revit. We're translating all light fixtures, regardless of whether or not they're IES, into IES fixtures on the fly. Eventually we may have additional V-Ray lights that you'll be able to place, but the idea here is that we need to remain non-destructive to the building information model database. So we want to make sure that when we're changing not only geometry but information, that information is getting stored in a meaningful way in the building information model. And so for that reason alone, we need to make sure that we support what's already built into Revit natively, and we're doing so through IES. That was our decision-making process as a part of what to do there. It's pretty simple. You can turn them on or you can turn them off. If you turn them on, we parse through your scene. We find the light fixtures that are in your scene, and we convert them to IES on the fly and then render them out. Exterior lighting, we support V-Ray Sun. V-Ray Sun is actually attached to the environment mechanism built into Revit itself, again, non-destructive to the database. So if you change time of day through native Revit, that will come through without any hiccups. It'll show in the V-Ray Sun, and all we're doing there is translating the sun into a V-Ray Sun and maintaining the rest of the mechanism. Additionally, we have a dome light support here, and the dome light really is our HDR lighting ability. You can adjust intensity, you can browse for your own additional, and then you've got a separate rotation dialog here, so you can rotate the sun inside of your, or rotate the image, the HDR image inside of your dome in order to get the sun shining from where you need it to for your imagery. Additionally, you can also do dome colors, so you can really get into what color you might want your dome to be if you don't want to use an HDR image. I'll flip back to this dialog, and then the final thing here is no light, and that gives you the option of not having any external light whatsoever. It will just allow you to do your artificial lights or your lights. So material browser, this is where we're a vast departure from any other V-Ray product, and it's that we don't currently ship with a material editor in the native sense. What our material editor does currently is it takes the material database that's in your project and in Revit, and it does a real-time translation at render time, and it does so fairly quickly. Our artists have poured through the shaders. They found a way to match them one-to-one, and they've spent a lot of time getting those as close as we possibly can, and we think we've got a good match across the board. But we continue to tweak these values. So if you see AutoGen here, you can see that whatever that Revit material is, we're automatically generating a V-Ray material for that at render time. Additionally, you can load in V-Ray material and you can load in VR mat currently. We're also going to have better support for V-Ray scan materials. We support them now. We're continuing to work with the V-Ray, our VR scan crew, to make a tighter integration. VR scan will be coming to the market very soon, and these are physically correct materials. We'll be able to pull those in and use those as well. So I'm not going to show you that today, but we'll talk a bit about that more here in just a bit. But we can map VR mats individually as one-to-one. We can also use a standard diffuse texture, so if you just want to add a flat map, we can do that. Or you can choose a color from Color Picker, and we're using the native Revit Color Picker here. So nothing overly fancy, but would love to get your feedback on some of what we've implemented there. So the one thing that I'd like to take a moment and show is that what sets us apart really from every other renderer out there that's integrated into Revit is that we also allow override materials. And override materials are great for diagnostic studies, but one of the toughest problems that we had to solve in the use of designers is that very early in the design process, you're not at a stage where you always want to necessarily show a finished photoreal rendering. And when that's the case, what we do is use override materials to kind of soften it, really focus on form and light. And so we allow you actually to set an override material for both opaque and transparent materials. Now what we're doing with these override materials is that it's looking for anything that's got a transparency to it. It will allow you to do single override on. So glass is a prime example of something that's going to be a transparent material. V-Ray reads that and will automatically apply whatever you set here as a transparent material override. Same thing with opaque. If it's got no transparency to it in the native Revit material, then it will read it as an opaque material, and we'll do an override here as well for that. So one little tip on this, I don't know how many of you are currently using the Revit beta. We announced Revit beta on December 2nd. We've had a very rough beta out there since then. You can sign up through v-ray.com if you haven't already done so. You'll see information there on how you can sign up for the beta. The big news is that we will have, and this is breaking to this crowd, we'll have beta 2 shipping here very, very soon. I can't give you an exact date, but let's just say it'll be within the next few weeks. We'll put it that way. And the new beta includes everything that I'm showing you in this particular build that I'm using. We're about 33% faster than the original beta. We will have I believe we'll have some implementation of distributed rendering, which I'll talk about here in just a bit. I'm not going to show that today, but we'll chat about it. We'll have some implementation of that, so you guys can see that as well. So last thing to show on these material overrides, getting back to this point, is that you can actually go out and do an override material. And one thing I'd like to point out is that most people don't know that this exists, so I'm going to show you. We actually ship some materials with the beta, some VR map files. I know there have been some questions about this. And so if you go into the C drive, I believe it is program files, chaos group, V-Ray, in this case we're Revit 2016 for Windows. And then we've got a little folder in here called content. And I'm showing you this because it hides. We don't discuss it in our documentation currently, but it's good for you to see and know that it exists. If we go to materials and diagrammatic, these are all diagrammatic materials that you can use as overrides that are great kind of early study things that our artists have put together. These are free for your use in any way that you see fit, but these will allow you to make a basswood model if you want a bass, or if you want it to look board, you can do that. We've got diagrammatic glass. I believe we've got transparent plastic, so it really can look like a museum board plastic model like you would build as part of the design process. So know that that exists. It ships with the product, and at some point in time we'll put those links up so you guys can see where those materials are so that you can use them, but you heard it here first. All right, having said that, I'm going to go ahead and move on with materials. One of the early feedback that we're getting right now is that lots of folks want some ability to have some material override or some material control. So what we're looking to do is ship possibly a standalone material editor. The benefit to a standalone material editor will allow you to build a library of materials that you can use in Revit, but you can also use in Rhino, SketchUp, Max, Maya, etc. And so we are working on that. Hopefully we'll have that for release. But again, we're looking for your feedback on this type of integration. And again, it's important to note that the reason that we're doing this is because we need to be non-destructive to the database when you're building a model that's actually going to get built. And it's important to think about it that way. This data needs to maintain in an appropriate way inside of the BIM. And so we think we do that, and then at the same time we still allow some translation to some great. So let me make sure I just have this stuff turned off because we will do a rendering here in just a moment. Expo Patrol is handled right now in a very simplified way. We go from 15 to 1. By default it's set at 14. Frankly, 14 and 8 are your best settings at the moment. If you're doing an interior rendering, 8 is probably a good place. If you're doing an exterior rendering, 14 is the place that you want to be. We've found that you can tweak some values. If you've got it set for interior, you've got interior, but you've got exterior glazing, it's the middle of the day. You can bring the sunlight down, the sun values down. If you go in here, you can bring your intensity down to like 0.25 and let your interior light shine at full strength. And that does a pretty good job with this set at 8 for interior. But you can also leave it set at 14 for an interior render right out of the box like that. So the last thing and the most complicated thing in our interface is the global settings. These are just, you know, where is V-Ray looking currently for materials, and you can add in your paths. We don't currently do UNC path for folks that are looking for that. We're looking to see what we can do about that, but at the moment we don't. So having a mapped drive becomes somewhat essential. You know, we do allow you to save renders once they're completed. And in fact, you can save them to the project, so you can actually save them down here in your render. And we'll get back to that here in just a bit. These are your export options. If you do choose to export as a VRC, and you can actually export this as an archive and send it to V-Ray standalone render, and it'll render just fine. These are the channels for the V-Ray frame buffer. Again, most users probably aren't going to be interacting with these things, but it's good to know that you have some level of control here. Distributed rendering, again, we've got a very early implementation of this. This continues to be a work in progress. Hopefully by beta 2, which is going to ship here shortly, we'll have this fully implemented. We do allow you to save and share your settings. So if you've set up material mappings, if you've done some specific camera tricks or environment distributed rendering settings and you want to save those out, you can actually export those savings and import them at a later date and time. So we have this working. Standard debug log here. Again, I'm only going through this stuff just so you know that it's in here. And for now we've added, and this is actually more than we wanted to, we've added some limited control of which engines you're using. So what you're looking at here is BF and LC, which is brute force and light cache. But you can choose between brute force and brute force light cache, radiance map light cache, and radiance map brute force. So you can switch your engine here for GI. and then the image sampler, do you want it to be bucket or progressive? And we've set this really based on lots of research. We've had our top artists really look at this stuff and say, what gives us the fastest results and the best kind of overall image at the same time? And so these are set accordingly. For RT, you can choose between CPU and GPU here. Again, at the moment, CUDA-enabled GPU is your best bet. We're continuing to work on that. We have found some issues with unmapped materials, so if you import geometry from a third-party application into Revit occasionally, you won't have a map on that. And so we have a highlight color, and you can choose what you want that material, that color to be. Again, most users aren't going to be playing with these settings, but know that you do get a little bit more access to some of the things under the hood there. Last two things I'd like to point out here, infinite ground plane. We do have that ability in here, which is great if you don't want to add in topography right away. You just need to do a quick study, but you need a ground plane to kind of center your building. You can turn that on here and adjust it. By enabling it, you can also adjust a material source or set a material source here and adjust some samples and submaterials and things like that. It's a pretty rudimentary setup right now, but we're continuing to expand on this as the beta goes along. Additionally, we also support probabilistic lights. So very large projects that have thousands of light fixtures. We've seen these probabilistic lights are going to make your rendering so much faster. What you see here is a number can be reflected as a percentage. So 0.25 is reflected as 25% of your lights get calculated at render time in order to affect the GI. So we do have probabilistic lights in there. Additionally, we do offer depth of field, depth of field down here. It's a little tricky. It takes some back and forth to get your setup just right, but it does work. We're working on better implementation of this, and we'll continue to do so. But again, we want to see and hear your feedback on some of what you see there. And we have stereoscopic rendering. This is a big thing to note right out of the box, and it's really just this simple. If I enable box 6:1, I'm going to get a stereo 6:1 image, which means 12 to 2 or 12 to 1, if you will. And that is a box map that most VR applications can wrap and use to drop it right into a VR scene for VR headsets. It's 2 checkboxes here. It's really easy to use. We've got integrations with guys like Iris VR, who've really made it drag and drop simple. But several other guys as well we're working with consistently. We support many folks in that effort and that endeavor. But I would suggest you play with that and get a feel for what some of the abilities are there and what some of the fun is that you can have with that as well. And we can render GPU as well as CPU stereoscopic. CPU always has slightly better results, tends to be a little brighter and look a little better than GPU, production versus RT. Production looks better than RT, but both do function. So I'm going to, at this point, just show you, and I'm going to get a little gutsy here and do an RT render, and hopefully this doesn't slow things down too much. I'm kind of watching what happens on my screen here, so bear with me just a moment. And this, of course, is the problem with live demos.
That's all right, Brian. While we wait, do you mind if I ask a couple of questions that we got in, that came in?
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely. I'm not sure
so
how much of me you're hearing, but that's good.
okay, so a, a few people are asking when VRA for Revit will release. I know it's, but can you ballpark it?
Sure. So the final product is we're really looking to do something late first quarter of this year, and ideally we'd like to kind of align with the Revit 2017 release, but I can't make any guarantees on that right now. There's too many factors at play, but ideally we'd like to go towards uh, that rough release date time.
Great, that's good to know. And also somebody says, I'm very excited about this beta. I enjoy using Autodesk 360 rendering. Will V-Ray have a send to cloud rendering option?
We ultimately will. We're working in a very interesting way right now with V-Ray Cloud, which is a product that probably most listeners have not heard of yet. We will at some point in time have a one-button click send to V-Ray Cloud. And V-Ray Cloud, the way V-Ray Cloud is set up right now, we will you'll have GPU as well as CPU support there. It can reside on your existing hardware infrastructure, or you'll be able to put instances up in Amazon or Google Clouds. So you'll have a little more control over the cloud service that you have, whether it's your internal hardware infrastructure or some mix of both.
Excellent. Do you want to try and go ahead with the presentation or?
Yeah, and you can see, and I apologize. This is again, I'm operating several things at once off of this one computer, so I apologize for that. But one of the things that I'll point out here, and this is continuing to work off of, I think I've got it set at CPU at the moment, which is why this is lagging. This will make use of any CUDA-based core, so if you have multi GPUs, this will make use of that. If you have multi-CPUs, it will make use of that as well. And I assure you, when you get the beta, it will run faster than it's running on my computer at the moment. And I do suggest you get into the beta program and give it a try for yourself. But what I'll point out here, and I'm going to have a miserable time actually showing you this at the moment, is that if you're in an internal or external RT view, it's a little known object that's built in. If you hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and your primary mouse button, you can actually spin your view around in the RT, in the V-Ray frame buffer. If you hold down Control, you can pan. If you hold down Shift in your middle mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out. So you actually have control over your full 3D scene inside of the V-Ray frame buffer itself. And again, that's something we don't advertise. It's a little bit buggy still, but it's good for you guys to know that it exists. You don't know otherwise, and my suggestion is you play with it a little bit and see if it doesn't serve some of your needs. Ultimately, our goal there is that because you can't be in a 3D scene and translating it real time and having RT update on the fly, that's one way that you could potentially. The other thing that you can do is time of day. We do support time of day, so if you adjust time of day inside of the Revit browser, Revit project itself, that will show in RT. So let me see if I can kick over here, and hopefully this will behave itself. Just kill this thing at the moment. And while we're waiting for this, if anyone has any additional questions, I can take those.
Okay. The question is, could we use V-Ray material for 3ds Max in Revit?
Most of the materials are, as long as you can export it as a VR mat, you should be able to bring it in. We've done some fun things actually with, let me see if I can do this really quickly. Please forgive me. We've done some fun things with the ability to support SS2 shaders. Most of the shaders that are built into Max you'll be able to bring in and are supported one-to-one in Revit. And you can do individual material overrides as well as larger material overrides. So for instance, tune-based material. We've created a tune-based shader in Max. We've brought it over. And the same thing applies actually with Rhino or SketchUp. In the latest versions of those, you can actually create materials there, save them as VR mats, bring them in Revit, and use them in Revit as your materials as well.
Cool. And is there any way to assign a generic IES light for the non-physical lights globally?
That's exactly what happens out of the box globally. So what happens is if it doesn't find your specific IES, so if you haven't loaded an IES to your light fixture in the Revit database or in the Revit light fixture, Revit family, it will automatically assign the generic IES to that and use that in its stead. So it will use Revit's defined generic IES profile.
Super. Will V-Ray allow plans and people generated in Revit to be rendered?
It does. We have full support right now for your standard RPC content, and we've worked really hard with ArcVision guys on this support. The only folks that have support for this in the way that we do, and we'll render it out of the box. Additionally, we're working on as well, so hopefully we'll have V-Ray proxy support soon, so you'll be able to put proxy objects in like proxy grass, etc. But our RPC contents, whatever libraries you have there, will support and render. And again, we do material translations on the fly, so whatever we see we'll render out as part of our rendering.
Yes, I have another question about the material. Will it ship with more pre-made materials?
We've actually discussed that. At one point in time, we went through and created an entire database of materials, and unfortunately what we found is that we can't get all of the materials that an end user is going to need, and it adds quite a bit of weight to the installer itself. So we're trying to avoid a 2 gigabyte installer, and so at this point, probably what we'll do is defer to website for accessing VR mats. We do, however, ship those diagrammatic materials, which are materials that aren't available on the website currently, but will be. We're aligning all of these things kind of as we go along. And then, the library on chaosgroup.com is supported, so you can bring those materials over, and then VR scan materials, which you'll see on chaosgroup.com as well. We'll support those as well, but those are much, much heavier materials, much larger materials. And again, we continue to work on that integration as well. So probably not at this point, but if we ship the standalone material editor, maybe we'll have some things packaged with that as well.
Fantastic. Will it support Revit 2015?
Support Revit 2015 and Revit 2016. We will be, at release, we will be supporting Revit 2017 as well, assuming they call it Revit 2017, whatever the next version of Revit is. We will support that as well.
Okay, and will there be support for ArcVision content?
There will be support for ArcVision content. So any of the RPC ArcVision content that you know and love or maybe have as your own libraries, again, at render time, we pull the RPCs over. We process the materials correctly and render from there.
Okay, so here's an architect with zero computer rendering experience, and he says, when this software will be released, will it come with tutorials, and also is there a projected cost for the software?
I don't have cost yet. That's something that we're still working on. We're hoping to make this as affordable and accessible as possible, to be honest with you. In terms of, and I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question again?
Yes, this person was asking if, since he's new to his rendering skills are lacking, he was asking if V-Ray for Revit will come with tutorials.
Tutorials, yes, yes. We already actually have tutorials available online in our documentation site. Once you get into the beta project itself, you'll have access to the tutorials through that. And additionally, we will be continuing to produce tutorials as well as quick start guides. Our goal is to produce a quick start guide, one a week roughly, through beta 2 launch and up through release. So even in beta 2, we're going to do a what's new in beta 2 video, enough to get you up and running. We'll talk about how to get started, and then additionally, we'll talk about where some of the resources are out there, and then we'll take deeper dives into each of the individual functions than what I've shown you today.
Great. Can we use customized exposure?
At this point, we're not doing customized exposure. That's the way we handle that is in the V-Ray frame buffer. We have an exposure value, an exposure override. So in the frame buffer itself, yes, but natively in V-Ray for Revit toolbar, no. So you won't be able to put in your own number, for instance. But you can go into the V-Ray frame buffer and get much more granular control there of many, in fact, all of the same post-processing effects that you're familiar with from Max, Maya, Rhino, SketchUp also exist in the frame buffer for Revit, so you can do those overrides there.
And I'm assuming there'll be license that can be shared between employees, right? That's another question.
That's a really great question. So V-Ray for Revit is a departure not only from all of the more complicated settings that you might get in V-Ray to a much more simplified approach, but we've also changed our license server. And this is a new thing for Chaos Group as well. We'll be releasing what's known as currently internally referred to as online licensing server, but it's the next generation of license server, and what we've done is done away with the hardware dongle, and what that means is it's all controlled through software. Now users will be able to be assigned a license that they can check out from your server, so you can set a server up and you can assign individual users a license that they can take for a couple of weeks. Otherwise, it'll just hit your internal server and find that license, or for folks that are just a standalone entity, or they're just, look, I'm just a guy that wants to render, I'm a standalone designer, I don't have a team, it'll install and run in the background on your computer and assign the licenses that way. So yes, is the short answer to that question.
That's a great change. Great. Do we have V-Ray FUR in Revit?
Not currently. That's probably going to be a little further out. I don't know if that'll make 1.0 of the release, but we continue to look at that option. I think proxy right now is our priority insofar as that's concerned. But we know you can do some really great things with V-Ray FUR, and that's on our list absolutely as one of the things we want to implement inside of V-Ray for Revit.
What is the render speed difference between the V-Ray for Revit plugin and V-Ray for 3ds Max?
As far as render speed is concerned, if settings are the same, the render speed is exactly the same. We are one-to-one with Max in terms of core to app SDK, and in terms of what we're doing, we're one-to-one there, and the speed should be this exact same if your settings are the same across the board.
And what about shutter speed, ISO, and aperture in camera?
Right, so those are physical camera traits, and we don't currently have a physical camera inside of Revit. That's something we are continuing to work on. We're also actually working with the Revit development team on this to see what we can do with the native Revit camera that's in there. continue to do so into the future. I can't give you a timeline on that, but that's definitely heavy on our minds as something that we want to be able to do. Right now, we don't have access to that, though.
Don't have a question, but some input, which is always appreciated.
Absolutely.
A workflow setting tutorial for working on a laptop with small graphics card would be appreciated.
Okay. We can absolutely do that. In fact, I'll pass this along to our guys and make sure we produce one.
Okay, great. Do you think will be possible having a multi-software license? For instance, this person is using Rhino, 3ds Max, Revit, and SketchUp.
I can't answer that. That's, as they say, above my pay grade. I think ideally I would personally like to see that. I think there are several people in the company that would like to see that. As it stands right now, they are separate licenses, and for at least the foreseeable future, they will be, but we're listening to our customers, and if that's the demand, then certainly we're going to rise to the demand that our customers are asking for.
I think those were all the questions. But if I'm wrong, please type them in again if I missed some of them. Yes, Brian, would you like to give it another try, or?
Sure. Let me just, I can at least show you guys some things and talk about there's one topic that's come up quite a bit in various forums and online, and I just want to address it. A lot of the knee-jerk reaction that I get from a lot of visualization experts, and it's really is, oh man, that's going to put me out of business, and the fact of the matter is it won't, and here's why. And I just again, just to reiterate this, visualization experts are experts for a reason. They know how to compose a scene, they know how to adjust materials, they know how to adjust the lighting. They're the guys that really need the more granular level of adjustment that you get with like V-Ray for Max, V-Ray for Maya, even in Rhino, V-Ray for Rhino, or V-Ray for SketchUp to some degree. But designers, they have a very specific thing that they need to see and be able to do. They need to be able to do quick renderings that they can show to a client, or render, in fact, in front of a client maybe. They need to be able to swap materials and see, is that the right material to use on that wall? Do I really want wood panel, or do I want something else there? And so they really are two very different disciplines, and let's be clear here, with V-Ray for Revit, we really are targeting the designer and less so the visualization expert. And what our hope is that this actually frees up the visualization expert from having to do those quick renderings, and enables them to really focus on things like making highly composed scenes that are really giving compelling stories. At the same time, we want to make sure that designers are armed with a renderer that really is serving them in a great way and helps unify their visualization platform, not only with Revit, but with SketchUp and Rhino, because most firms out there aren't just using one standalone software, they're using many. They've got a digital toolbox, and so we want to support that as well. In addition, and kind of reaching back to non-photoreal, this is that toon-based shader as an override with an HDR background. This is directly out of Revit. This is actually, this particular image, I believe, is about 8 to 10 months old at this point, so this was done with a very early build of the product. Those trees are actually RPC trees that have an override on them. So we do have support for RPC, even if you're doing things like making them transparent or solid color. These are renderings that we're producing out of our latest build, latest nightly build, and these will be the kind of the level of quality you can expect to get out of the Beta 2 product. I will say that with a small caveat. These are produced by our artists. There is no post-production done on these. These are directly out of V-Ray for Revit. so the bending glass, stuff like that. Those are all settings that they did in the materials themselves. You'll see geometry in some cases that's produced in Max or in Rhino that's then imported into Revit here. So there's certainly a quality level that they'll get to that most designers won't do as part of their design process, but we do support it and we do render it at render time. So this is a small project that we've been working on. This is probably closer to normal, and this is us playing with what happens when you put 3D grass in a Revit scene. What do you get? Can the renderer handle that much geometry? And the short answer is yes, it can. We've got 3D bushes there, 3D grass there, some additional RPC content, the trees in the background, some of the other round shrubs in there. We've got full displacement support, so we do support displacement in the materials, and we'll read that back out and that will show. This is one of our hero images. This is actually Esherick House, and Ben Hurlbut, who's one of our artists who does videos for us and a few other things. This is his little pet project, and he's done a what-if scenario on the interior of Esherick House, famous piece of architecture. And so we've rendered that out, so you'll see things like the oranges up there. You know, that's SS2 shader, excuse me. We've got ceramic in there, we've got glass, you can see copper pots, things of that nature. Again, this is 100% out of Revit, although some of the geometry is brought in from external. Some of the materials were made in V-Ray for Rhino and brought in here.
I'm sorry, Brian, I don't think we're seeing the same images you're talking about.
Can you tell me which image you're seeing right now?
We're seeing the outdoor model of the house with the red roof.
Ah, I apologize.
Okay. I was trying to look for those oranges and I couldn't see them.
Can you, what do you see right now? Do you see my PowerPoint presentation by chance?
No.
No, you still don't. So it's still showing Revit.
Yeah. It's still showing Revit and it's kind of stuck.
Okay. So what may have happened is the presentation part of this may have frozen. I apologize.
Okay. No, it makes sense. I was like, okay, I don't see oranges. Is it me?
So what I'll do is a follow-up to this then, and I apologize for this, is I'm going to take this PowerPoint presentation that I have, and in fact I've got an embedded video that'll walk you through kind of a getting started with Revit in this presentation, and I'll send it to you immediately following the webcast, and you can post that up on your website for your users to download, and they can then see these images that I'm talking about.
Cool.
And play with them, but I apologize for that. I'm sorry.
No problem. It always happens to the best. So this is nothing. It's the best. It's the best part of being live. You know, anything can happen. So yeah, I have another couple of questions if you don't mind. So
absolutely,
can make somebody really happy with. Can we render panorama in V-Ray for Revit?
You can. You can render panorama, and I'm not sure when you say panorama how you're defining that. You can render panorama if you set the camera frustum correctly. It'll render properly. So yes is the short answer for that. If you're talking about a cubic map or something that you can use inside of a VR instance, like a VR headset, yes, we support that as well with the 6:1, 12:1, and those are just two checkboxes in the Revit interface itself. So we support both.
Okay. Is there a way to multi-select materials to change them all at once, not using a material override?
There is, at this point in time, not a way to do that. You still have to do them individually. That's something that we are working on. That's something actually that my developer hates me because I brought up to him, is that I want the ability to grab 5 of these things at once and give them a single material. We're working on it. We don't have a way to do it just yet, but we'll get there for sure.
Okay, now this question is a little bit, I don't know, maybe you understand better what they're trying to say. Can I get from the render different renderings by channels, like object channel, color of objects, reflectance channel, etc., to use them?
You can. In fact, that's built into the native V-Ray frame buffer itself. So just like you have channel support inside of V-Ray for Max or Rhino, we have the V-Ray for Revit as well. And under the settings dialog inside of V-Ray for Revit, you can actually choose which channels you want to export. So yes, we do support channels.
Okay, so I think that was it. Let me go through. Yeah, I think. Does the plugin support walkthrough animation camera from Revit?
We don't currently support it, and it's because of the way that the camera works inside of Revit, but we are looking at what our options are for that for the future. I would argue that you could do it a frame at a time, but it'd be a really convoluted process, and if you're looking to do that, probably better to go to 3D Max and render animation there. But we are looking at that possibility for the future.
Now I think I have one last question. Is it possible to render out a separate alpha channel for post-processing?
Yeah, that would be through the channels themselves. We do support alpha, so you can absolutely do post-processing and GI paths, you know, all of your standard channels come across. That's not a problem. Alpha certainly is supported.
Okay, that was it. So since your screen is frozen, I'm gonna show my screen now, if you don't mind. I'm gonna
Okay,
take it back.
please do.
Let's see. Okay, and I want to thank you so much, Brian. You got us all excited about V-Ray for Revit, and we couldn't have hoped for a better testimonial. So thank you so much. You're very knowledgeable, and the questions, you know, they showed a lot of interest, and you really gave it your best. And also, a lot of people are very excited about joining the beta. So I will tell you that there's a link on the registration page that you use to register the webinar. There's a link that will take you to V-Ray for Revit beta. Go back and look for it. And also, I want to thank you for attending this webinar, and remind you that you should visit noveg.com, and you will find Revit for now and V-Ray for Revit in the future. Stay tuned. Noveg is the best way to buy design software online. And for information on the latest specials and new releases, and you can always follow us on Google Plus, Twitter, and Facebook. And next webinar will be on Modo for design ideation. And it's the first time we have bar architecture on our webinar. Woof, woof. And to rewatch today's webinar, or previous one, check out our Noveg YouTube and Vimeo channels. Our webinar playlist has webinars for every software taste. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Brian, and have a wonderful day, everybody.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.